Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Hope everybody had a fantastic weekend. So we've got Zed Jelani on. He's going to talk about interesting way of categorizing people over at the New York Times. We also have Mary Margaret Olhan on. She's going to talk about this big controversy around the Netflix film Cuties. But we want to start with a slew of new Battleground polls that just came out.
Oh, yeah, some pretty crazy polls. So let's start there with the New York Times. One of our best polls that we see, the New York Times Siena poll there. Minnesota, Biden 50, Trump 41. Nevada, Biden 46, Trump 42. New Hampshire, Biden 45, Trump 42. Wisconsin, Biden 48, Trump 43. Broadly, a slight tightening there, Krystal, but we can also see there with CBS News, similar numbers coming out of Minnesota at 50 and 41. Arizona, quite tight at 47 and 44. And then we also have a Fox News Battleground poll, national poll there, 51, Biden 51, Trump 46. Slight tightening there. You can also see in some of the crosstabs of about where exactly both Biden and Trump are leading. Broadly, though, the general analysis on this was that, yes, there has been a slight tightening, but that maintaining that Biden lead, which still far outpaces generally where Hillary Clinton was back in 2016 to where they are right now, is a very comfortable way, which leaves Biden several different paths forward to a win in the Electoral College.
Some of the polling in particular out of Minnesota I found interesting because the Trump campaign has been talking to us about Minnesota for a long time. Why? Well, in part because they sort of seem like they've given up on Michigan. I mean, spending very little money there. They would never admit that, of course. But those numbers seem to have really moved away from them. Not that you want to take anything for granted. So Minnesota was one of those states that Hillary Clinton very narrowly won, that they thought they had a real shot at. But as we see from the New York Times Battleground poll and from the CBS Battleground poll, both of them had Minnesota at basically a 9-point spread. And essentially what's happened here is that Biden is outpacing Hillary among suburbanites.
That's right.
You have a large proportion of the Minnesota population that is suburbanites and urbanites. And so even though President Trump is certainly holding on to what he did last time among rural voters, Biden hasn't really made any gains there. Biden is actually outperforming Hillary because of how strong he is with those white suburbanites at this point.
Yeah, and I think there was just so the Trump campaign, and we cover it as well, they love to talk about the rise in Hispanic numbers, right? Especially that, I think it was from 25 to 37, something like that.
Yeah.
And how it could put him as a tipping point over in Miami-Dade County, which could flip Florida. All of that is true. But as you just showed, if the Biden strategy is to bring out all these, not just white suburbanites, but new white suburbanites, people who did not vote in 2016 or who explicitly voted Republican, then you need to bring out a similar block of voters. There were, I think, 40 million white working class voters who didn't vote in the 2016 election,
right,
and who the Trump campaign could be trying to go after. Now, his support amongst that group has not been depressed, but it has not increased either.
Right.
There's no evidence that he's trying to do more in order to bring out that voting group. And also, critically to the Electoral College, that's what could actually turn a Minnesota or a Pennsylvania or a Wisconsin back into the Republican category. So, yeah, great. You've got some increased Hispanic support. I think it, breaks some woke shibboleths, kind of around why people vote and who don't. But that doesn't mean that your core strategy of 2016 shouldn't be one that you emphasize more, and they're just not doing that right
That's
now.
Exactly right. It's interesting because back in 2016, there was this famous and ultimately infamous quote, I believe from Ed Rendell, former governor of Pennsylvania, of course, big Hillary Clinton supporter, who's basically like, look, for every one person we lose in rural America, we're going to pick up 2 in the suburbs. Well, didn't work out last time.
Yeah.
This time it actually seems like it is. Because there were a decent number of white Republican women in suburbs who kind of held their nose and voted for Trump this time, who have actually shifted to Biden. The senior number, same deal. There are a lot of people who, because of his coronavirus handling in particular, have moved over to Biden. Look, by and large, Trump has kept his base intact, but there has been some erosion in those demographic groups. And if you aren't making up for that in any other category, then you're not going to be able to pull it off. So the other thing that I saw analysts talking about, Harry Enton over at CNN in particular, is the fact that in a lot of these polls, Biden is actually over 50%. And that was the thing last time around for Hillary. She really was never
break
polling over 50%. you had third-party candidates who were garnering more support than this time around. This time it really is just, Biden versus Trump, so you don't have that third-party split off, which was less significant ultimately than people made it out to be, but that is a distinguishing factor here as well. And so Harry Enton basically made the case, look, we always say this thing like nothing matters, doesn't matter how insane Trump is or what insane event transpires across the country, the numbers don't seem to shift that much. If that's the case, Biden is going to win.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we are today.
See, and that's the thing which the people cannot get through their heads, which is that so much has changed in the makeup of the electorate. For example, in the New York Times poll, you can actually see amongst senior voters, Biden in the battlegrounds actually has 52% of people who are over the age of 65. Compared to Trump's 40%, a 12-point deficit amongst the most likely group to vote and, a group that Trump won last time around. And almost all of it seems to be tied to the coronavirus. So we can throw some of these polls up there on the screen. The New York Times actually has this from this is Minnesota and Wisconsin. And you can see there about the handling of coronavirus. 52-41 almost exactly tracks with senior support for Biden and Trump. And then we also have the exact same thing from Arizona, another critical state from CBS News. Look at that. Biden 50, Trump 37. And, I was perusing through the CBS data. There is not one indicator on coronavirus or the economy, except for manufacturing, where Trump leads Biden in this poll. So what the Trump campaign would always point to is but Trump is fine on the economy. No, according to this one, in the crosstabs of all voters are just as likely to trust Joe Biden as Donald Trump when it comes to the economy. The only issue where they trust Trump more than Joe Biden is manufacturing. Now, if you're the Trump campaign, you might want to lean into that. But the current one, they're not doing that.
Yeah, and they've taken it for granted that those numbers would stay static.
And it
they
eroded over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. They just assumed that the numbers on the economy would stay in Trump's favor because they have relatively consistently. Yeah. But the Biden campaign has at least done a few things. I'm actually talking in my radar today how insane it is that neither camp has really embraced this populist economic message. Bernie Sanders is out criticizing, rightly so, the Biden campaign for failing to do so, but at least they did the Buy American thing. At least they've done a few messaging and program rollouts that people can kind of latch on to, whereas the Trump campaign really hasn't focused on that. It hasn't been able to articulate a second-term agenda whatsoever. And at the same time, look, as we've been tracking here and as the Woodward revelations underscore, what Trump did back in February and his failure to address the coronavirus pandemic effectively from that time really going forward is what this election is turning on. There's new numbers out this morning from CNBC. Coronavirus cases are growing in 11 U.S. states, so this thing is far from over. We've reviewed the polling here before that people feel very strongly like there's going to be a second wave. They think the worst is yet to come. And on that critical central issue, especially for seniors, Donald Trump is utterly failing, is dramatically behind Joe Biden. And that really tells the tale. And look, things like, going out last night and doing an indoor rally with very few masks in sight, that doesn't help. And I know that this is something that cable news talks about. When you see those images of all those people together, when you know the life that you've been leading and you know that your kids can't go to school because this thing is still unchecked, any sort of messaging that they try to do around, oh no, we really are taking this seriously, oh no, we really do have this under control, is completely undermined by those images.
Well, what bothers me is that the Trump campaign response was if people can riot and loot and burn cities, then people can gather peacefully to listen to their president. And I'm yeah, but the whole point is that people shouldn't be rioting and looting and doing all that, and they shouldn't be gathering, period, right? Just because it in one group is dramatically hypocritical and doesn't want to abide by public health guidance doesn't mean that you should also flout public health guidance. Yeah, I don't think they should be doing an indoor rally. I saw the same thing. I saw some masks. I just want to be clear. And, they were putting them on. They even had Trump ones, which they should have done from the very beginning. But that's the part that drives me nuts, is that he always seems to undercut their own messaging and critique against the other side by being well, they did it. It was yeah, but just because they did doesn't mean that you should too. And actually, that's part of the reason
and Joe Biden has also condemned any of the rioting, looting very clearly.
Especially whenever you have that type of situation. So I just think that whenever it comes to that, there's a clear reason why the American people do not trust Trump whenever it comes to coronavirus. And that is always going to be his most deadly indicator. It's just one of those things that you cannot you can't spin your way out of. It's not a media creation. It's not fake. It's actually real. And you're pointing to the rising cases. It's very much, already we're all beginning to see fall is generally upon us. It could begin to increase now over the next couple of weeks. Colleges are really in the swing of things now, which have generally been a nexus for coronavirus. So all of the groundwork and indications are there for a spike, which is always going to be bad for Trump.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radars. That's next.